Watts saw his daughters at the mall.
I simply beeped the horn and waved to them. They waved back to me.
The next people he saw, the police.
And I went to jail for 55 days.
Harry Stewart opened a door for his son.
I just, waved to him, hugged my son Derek, and left.
Sentence, 6 months.
It's just a war on fatherhood.
There's a battle going on in the Bay State between fathers who feel wrongly accused and a system set up to protect people in fear. Are these men denied justice?
It really is like 1984.
Or in denial.
There are people who are trying to hold on to the right to control other people.
If it can happen to someone like me, I feel like it can happen to anybody.
Out of Order, next on Chronicle.
I was put on this earth to be a daddy. I will say that to anybody till the day I die. I was as happy as any man on the face of this earth, and then all of a sudden, all of that was taken away. And it was taken away through a lie.
For the last 3 years, Dennis Watts has been haunted by the fallout from what he claims was a frivolous restraining order filed by his wife as their marriage was coming undone.
The kids told my wife that they wanted to live with Daddy, and that's what started this whole issue. I have nothing whatsoever to hide. You can look at the records, you can look at the court records, the police records, and there's nothing. And that's what makes this so absurd, and I can't believe this could even happen in America.
3 years without his girls and 5 jail stints later, the result of trying to contact his kids, Watts' life is in pieces.
I sit here some nights alone and think about this. I think about it often. I think about it maybe too much. But it has completely destroyed my life.
An Everett woman was killed today after a bomb was delivered to her home.
As the recent atrocity in Everett attests, violence against women is a very real problem. The mail bomb death of Sandra Burfield has raised anew the question of whether restraining orders work.
If there's a man who, for whatever reason, wants to harm or even kill a woman, is this the man that is going to be stopped by a piece of paper?
Fathers' rights activists like Mark Sheralambus allege there's a flip side to the problem. Less lethal, perhaps, but far more common. The abuse of restraining orders in bitter domestic situations.
I think that the only thing to really call this is just a war on fatherhood.
What was the violation that brought you here? Why are you incarcerated today?
I held this Bible and I raised my right hand and I said, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And because of that fact that I would not lie, I am now housed in a about 11-foot by 7.5-foot cell.
Harry Stewart, a lay minister from Weymouth, admits he got out of his car to help his son at his ex-wife's apartment house, a violation of his restraining order. But he says he had no choice. Harry Stewart was dropping off his 5-year-old son after a scheduled visit. Stewart says he honked the horn several times, as was customary. But when his wife didn't come out and his son was struggling to open the front door, Stewart says he got out of the car and cracked open the front door for his son.
I just, waved to him, hugged my son Derek, and left.
He's convinced it was a setup. He was arrested and ordered into a 12-month batterers program. Just one hitch. Stewart's never been accused of physical abuse. When he refused to admit to violence, a condition of entering the batterers program, he was sentenced to 6 months in jail.
To be honest, yeah, some people thought I was nuts. You go ahead and you lie, you're free. You go ahead and tell the truth, you're going to jail for 6 months.
And as part of the therapy, you have to admit that, that you understand, all this theory about battery and the patriarchy and control and abuse and violence. And he wouldn't admit it. He says, listen, I didn't do these things.
The case of Harry Stewart has made Massachusetts ground zero for fathers' rights groups. Mark Sheralambus and fellow members of the Fatherhood Coalition support Stewart's stand against what they see as a court system that's paralyzed by political correctness. beholden to radical feminist notions that men are wired for violence and control.
He said, I'm not going to admit to this really, you know, it really is like 1984. It's like, how many fingers, Mr. Smith? How many fingers? And finally, Winston Smith says, I see it now. There are 3 fingers there. Yes, now I understand. I mean, it really is an Orwellian situation where you have to tell them what they want to hear.
Denial is a big problem in the beginning.
Mitch Rothenberg, director of Common Purpose, the batterers program Harry Stewart refused to enter.
You may have a man who violates a restraining order, and in his mind the intention is simply to let the child in, to make sure the child's safe. I wonder if there's also another level of intention where it's also to give a message which might be something like this. You may get a restraining order against me, but I don't always have to abide by it. Or you just can't say no to me.
Virtually all domestic violence programs are designed for men. Evidence, critics say, of an outdated notion that only men batter.
We've found, starting in 1975, that women assault their partners at about the same rate. There's hardly any difference.
Murray Strauss has been studying domestic assault for over 2 decades. He's pleased women have greater protections today as they suffer the greater physical harm. But he says our laws wrongly assume men are the only aggressors.
It's gone too far in the other way, as though men are never victims, as though women are never offenders. And this is an offense, regardless of whether men or women do it.
The Norfolk County DA's office, known for aggressively prosecuting domestic assault cases, declined comment on Harry Stewart.
The district attorney's office refuses to comment on your case. Why, do you think?
Well, I honestly believe that they're embarrassed, that they've been caught doing their business as usual, and the media got a glimpse of it.
Coming up later, are these men crying wolf?
Everybody recognizes that we have all these children who are living without their fathers.
Coming up next, a dirty secret from divorce court.
It's almost a form of blackmail.
Yeah, it's extortion.
The purpose of me being here is just so that I can have safety by the court.
Not long ago, women were as likely to be patronized as protected by the courts.
This district court has a lot of more serious matters to contend with people waiting out there.
Spousal abuse was considered a private matter, sometimes with tragic results.
Dunn was shot with a 45.
10 years ago, battered women had no support, no legal support, no supports in the court. And it was very wise of the courts and the legislation to recognize that this is a problem. The pendulum, however, swung the other way, and we have completely abdicated any rights of the defendants or those accused of abuse.
Divorce attorney Shira Friend estimates about 1/3 of all restraining orders filed in divorce cases are bogus, tactical weapons in nasty custody battles.
You see this in your own practice?
I see it in my own practice constantly. I see lawyers who will come to me and say to me, look, if you give me the financial deal I'm looking for, we will vacate the restraining order.
It's almost a form of blackmail.
Yeah, it's extortion. I think it's a form of extortion.
60,000 restraining orders, or 209As, are issued each year in Massachusetts. And a recent court study showed less than half contained allegations of physical abuse.
And you don't need to have an allegation of actual physical abuse in Massachusetts. You have to have fear of physical abuse. And so that's a very subjective standard.
You know, he shook her and stated he was going to kill her.
Of course, the idea is well-meaning, to prevent violence before it happens. But there's a steep price for that prevention, says Mark Sherrilambis of the Fatherhood Coalition.
We have a law that basically punishes people for behavior that hasn't happened, a preemptive strike based on what they might do because of how somebody else feels.
Critics say that because restraining orders are technically a civil matter, due process and rules of evidence are routinely ignored.
If you accuse me of stealing your car and we go to court and you don't have any evidence, it's just your say-so and it's my say-so I didn't, case dismissed. You go in with a woman in court and she just accuses you of being abusive or that she's even just afraid of you, that's it.
Judge Dorothy Gibson denies that there is any bias against men in her Cambridge courtroom.
Each case is different. You start with a blank slate on each case that you see.
And sorting out the facts in messy domestic situations can take time. In the interim, she concedes, it's often better to be safe than sorry.
In the short term, I may enter that order to be safe so that there is no possibility of any abuse occurring.
I think this is an unprecedented situation where there's no downside for the accuser. There's no penalty for making false allegations. Dr. DiMatteo.
Peter DiMatteo is an emergency room physician trained to handle the unexpected. And although he and his wife were in couples therapy, he says nothing prepared him for the knock at his front door one morning. It was the police notifying him of his divorce.
Then the next thing he said took me by complete surprise, and he said, this is a restraining order. You have to leave your house immediately. And, you know, it was a very, very unsettling and difficult thing to relive. You've seen movies where people's lives just collapse in front of them, and that's what this is all about. Everything you've worked for is just flushed out of your life immediately.
DiMatteo's wife claimed in the restraining order that he had threatened her in the past, and now that she was filing for divorce, she was, quote, afraid of his reaction. Attorney Shira Friend represents DiMatteo.
At what point does the state interfere with the family relations? You know, are you allowed to fight anymore with your spouse? Are you allowed to yell anymore? There are affidavits from women and men that say he's raised his voice and I can see his anger and his veins or her veins were coming out of her neck. Restraining order it was issued.
DiMatteo denies that he was ever violent or intimidating with his wife. She stands by her request for a restraining order, but on the advice of her attorney declined an interview.
Let's face it, no one can ever really know what happens behind the closed doors of a marriage. And no one is arguing that people shouldn't be given vigorous protection who are suffering from true physical harm. But critics are asking, is the mere allegation of what might happen enough to trigger a powerful legal tool like a 209A restraining order?
I think that it's a very important story that we're telling now. I think that since divorce can affect half the people in the country, the people in the Commonwealth need to know that any day the police could knock at their door.
I think we need just to give everybody equality, and that means you are innocent until proven guilty. If you do it the other way around, you're causing a lot of devastation and torture in people's lives.
When I got a restraining order saying that I could not see my children for 2 weeks, it was the most devastating thing I've ever got in my life.
Dennis Watts simply couldn't accept the terms of his restraining order. He'd been accused of threatening to take his daughters away from his wife and her new partner.
And after that accusation was made, I was given the restraining order. You stay away from your children. I never said I would take my children. I never thought of taking my children, and I would never have taken my children.
Watts would go to jail 5 times over the next few years for contact with his daughters, Denna and Sarah, once after a chance encounter at a mall.
I simply beeped the horn and waved to them. They waved back to me. I kept going. An hour later, I come home, and the police are sitting in my driveway, and I went to jail for 55 days.
The restraining order was a wound Watts couldn't stop picking at. It seemed to have infected his girls as well.
They ran away 27 times to come home to Daddy, and the police would come up to the home that they grew up in and simply take my children away. And they would run away the next day, and the police would come up and take them away again. And finally, it got so bad, it got so emotional one day. I was crying, my children were crying, and I said to the kids, don't do it anymore. I said, don't come see Daddy anymore, because I didn't want to see them put in the police car and taken away.
Calls to Watts' wife's attorney and the judge who sentenced him went unreturned.
What I would say is that when a judge makes an order, we need to follow it.
Nancy Scannell of Jane Doe, Inc., a woman's advocacy group. She cautions that specific infractions may seem minor, but when added together make a very real threat.
And so when the final thing happens, what she is certain of is that this person is demonstrating that they are not going to abide by this order. And so they need somebody else to enforce it.
The fact that he is not willing to comply with a restraining order is as predictive of his reoffending as if he committed an actual assault.
Eve Bazawa's research on restraining orders suggests that women are targeting the right men.
They had twice the criminal history rate of those that didn't have restraining orders against them.
Bazawa says the best predictor of future violence is past criminal history, but Watts found his innocence lost for good.
I'm 47 years old, never been arrested, never been in jail, never been in a bit of trouble in my entire life, and now all of a sudden I've been in jail 5 times because my wife left me for another man. It's devastated my life. I find it hard to go to work. I find it hard just to function in life every day.
We haven't figured out yet how best to discriminate between what's going on from what we think may be going on. And so everybody errs on the side of caution, and the aftermath sometimes is very traumatic for families.
Therapist Jane Appel has noticed a troubling trend.
I think that if you speak to people in the divorce field, you'll find that there was a period of time in which allegations of child sexual abuse were used to get people away from their kids, to get people out of the house, and to make a claim for custody. I think 209As have become the vehicle of choice more recently.
Appel often evaluates domestic violence cases for the courts.
We're very scared in this society in general about anger getting out of control. And I think what we're seeing here, unfortunately, are some very bad violations of people's rights in our attempts to struggle with that issue.
The Fatherhood Coalition is carrying its fight to the federal courts. They filed a class action lawsuit alleging bias against men in Bay State courts. And Peter DiMattio's gone to Beacon Hill to testify about his experience.
I can tell you that it doesn't just hurt the spouse, it hurts the whole family.
DiMattio's restraining order has been dropped.
And you will find that most domestic relations attorneys know it's a problem, but very few will speak out. And they don't want to talk about it because it's so politically incorrect.
Everybody recognizes that we have all these children who are living without their fathers.
But women's advocates suspect that fathers groups are merely resentful of women's newfound power.
These particular groups, I would say, are not what they say that they are. But they are people who are trying to hold on to the right to control other people.
Meanwhile, Harry Stewart, released this week, reserves his resentment for the system, not his ex-wife.
But I honestly do have some anger, I think righteous indignation is a better word for it, towards people who should just know better, the judicial system, the politicians who privately...
And a judge recently ruled Dennis Watts can see his daughters again.
This experience has, it's changed me as a person. It really has. It's changed my life. It's changed my way of thinking. I'd like to say right now that if anybody listening to this thinks that it can't happen to them, they're absolutely wrong. Because if it can happen to someone like me, I feel like it can happen to anybody.